Yeah. Bonjour. I know we just ate, guys. Bonjour. Good. That concludes the French of this presentation. I'm glad that I was able to work that part in for the students. Today, I'm going to be talking about validating your existence, but I think that I kind of pivoted a little bit. Yes, pivot. Synergied with some of the things that Amir said. And then I found that one of the things he was saying is that you make it a little bit more personable, and it actually speaks to people a little bit more. So actually, I think I'm kind of saying this in a few different ways. It already was there, but now I'm going to kind of like play it off the cuff, so I'm actually pretty happy about this. I want to talk about validating your existence and validation, but at the same time, it's sort of the story on creating a very important aspect, which is this Ruby community. In a lot of ways, we all kind of come together, not just for today, but also we come here and we validate by sitting here and talking to each other, and we validate Laurent, who gets to actually see his creation be amazing in the actual production. So let's go ahead and give a round of applause. Yes, of course, without whom I would just be a guy sitting in my room with the same exact slides. So let's find out a little bit. I actually open sourced this presentation. I didn't do it alone. I feel like community is the very basis of what I'm doing here. So ideally, who am I? Well, if you haven't heard me mentioned so far, I have written quite a few gems that are included in Red Potion. I've integrated with the community. I've talked to people. And one of the things that I really get excited about is working with each individual. But for the most part, if you don't know who I am, don't worry about it. It's your fault. I do quite a lot of things, some of them more known than others, but I enjoy public speaking, writing. I actually wrote a RubyMotion book, and overall coding. And I'm not here to just talk about the amazing things I've done. I'm here to talk about how these things are possible. And I think that also, along with the validation, comes with the idea that with this community, I really owe a huge shout out to the people who helped me right when I began. So Matt Garrison from Iconoclast Labs. I definitely got a good bit of help from the gems that were created early on. And then ideally also, I've gotten a great deal of help and work through Infinite Red. So thank you very much, Todd and Ken. So we talk about data validation. It's not a very popular subject. Unfortunately, we have to sort of force the idea that somebody is going to mess up our data in our application. We have to work against it actively. And when you want to actually deal with communicating with other developers, no one wants to deal with it. And so the only other alternative is completely impossible. You can't just sit there and let the users do whatever they want with your application. It's the worst idea you could possibly do. And so the idea here is that if you are, what are you doing if you're actually not thinking about this process? And some people are security minded, and some people just say like, oh, well, let's see what things happen. But ideally, I think it's not either of those things. It's bravery deters regret. You asked for quotable tweets. So there you go. That's what I came up with. So how do we start off with this? And it's actually a journey, because this was the first large gem inclusion that I had done. And so I reached out to common authors, and I was talking to people. And I spoke with Todd, and he said to me, you need to write something that's going to make you happy. That's something you want to use. What's the perfect API that you would want to deal with? And so I came up with some ideas, and I brought them back. I was like, I would like it to do this. I mean, I don't think it's that complicated. And then he came back, he's like, well, couldn't it also do this? I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. And then you know what? It could also do this. And then some other people were like, oh, it could also do this. I was like, that's great. And he said, cool, create it. I was like, oh. Where did everybody go? So I created a large GitHub ticket issue. It was a giant issue. I should have pulled it up for this. And then I started working on it. And then I was like, man, this is going to be serious. And then, oddly enough, something, again, from the community magically happened. I had David come along, and David actually showed up, and he's like, hey, I actually did this part of this task. I was like, I don't know who the hell you are, but good. So a lot of the data validation that I brought in actually came, I can't take credit for all of it. It's a big team effort. And so I get to talk about it, but ultimately it's a group effort. So what was the ideal validation that I came up with? Might be what a lot of you might come up with yourself. I would like to make sure this is a number. True or false? That shouldn't be too complicated. It seems like a really simple concept. I'm asking for a number. I should get a number. Well, that seems like that's a pretty cool idea. But the problem is, we're taking the information, we're moving it off to the side, and then we put it back, we kind of have to deal with the user. I mean, validation in its essence, yes, is this a number, but you have to actually interact with the user. So it's also important to deal with them at the source. If you stop them at the source, you actually increase, well, except for this guy, you increase the user's happiness. So why not here with this 1990s screenshot? So another idea for validation is let's attach the validation rule onto the actual field so that the field is a little bit smarter about exactly what it's supposed to do. And then we can ask the field, is it a valid field? We can interact with the user that way. Well, it might be overkill. You might not want to do all that. You might not even understand what the hell I'm talking about. So the ultimate answer is that let's do both. And then ideally, the place, of course, for attaching onto an object, adding validation rules, and having it in the build process said, wow, that's actually a lot of code. And it made sense to kind of piggyback on something that already existed, which I think was Todd's plan all along. So additionally, it's like, OK, time to build this. Validation as a utility. What should it be? Well, we should have some preset ideas, like email and US phone number and US zip. And then you put in the information, and they could build it. So in RMQ, the idea was RMQ validation.valid, and then you put the information in there. And then we should create a nice list of common validation needs, things that you need to worry about, and significant things that you don't really think about, difference between numbers and digits. And then ultimately things that kind of build off of each other, like strong password cares about having upper and lowercase letters. As these things come together, they should also be flexible. You don't think about that until you're deep in it. A length. Well, what does that mean? Exact length, a minimum length, a max, a range with an exact, and then do I strip white space to make sure that that's actually not part of it? I would have never thought about all these things alone. So validation as a utility should also include a little chance for you to kind of tie in and not break your idiomatic form as you're going through. Obviously, I'm not going to think of all of them. So you need to say, oh, well, we really want to make sure that they entered in nachos. So we're going to make sure that we can create just simply based off of a regular expression and give them that particular validation at that point. Things that you don't think about additionally. Allowing blank, right? So let's say I have a spot where I want a user's weight, but it's an optional field. If they enter in nothing, that's not a valid number, but it's an optional field. So we should have an option to say, allow blank. This simply says, hey, if they fill in anything, make sure it's a number, or make sure it's what it should be. And then these should permeate throughout everything else. And then additionally, you can't see the entire future, so you need to worry about whitelisting. Whitelisting is when somebody puts a port at the end of that URL, kind of makes a URL validation a little squirmish, but they only need it for local hosts. So go ahead and stick it in the whitelist and it's fine. There's always going to be a few outliers. Additionally, oh, shit. Sorry about that. Facebook syncs with everything. Okay. So as a rule, is its own aspect in a certain side. we can stop them earlier on. And the idea of attaching on the validation with RMQ was the simple idea: give the validation rule when you are referring to that particular field. And then later on, when you're appending fields, you have chainable validations. Which one? Yeah, you did? Jamin, I believed in you. So additionally, at any moment, we can add a bunch of validations randomly throughout as we build our form, wherever we build our form. And then we can simply check a validation for one item, see if it's valid, and then you actually pass in that field. And it doesn't have to be text, it could be whatever. And then you could just say rmq.all.valid. And so ideally, you can check the entire screen at the same time. Additionally, you want to give the user some kind of feedback so you can find out who's bad. I practiced my moonwalking for this one. It did not work too well. So additionally, you can say which ones were invalid, which ones were not invalid, also known as valid. And so we can identify these, and it just simply returns an array of items so that you can highlight them, mess with them, do whatever you have to do. Just give a really friendly interface for that. And additionally, there should be an event on valid and on invalid, so we can tell our users, not with puts, preferably the user won't see that, but you can do something that they'll actually care about when you check the validity of it. And somebody actually asked me this question the other day: when does it actually check for these items? When you call .valid with a question mark. This gives you the freedom to wait, let them fill out the entire form, and then at the very end, when they hit the submit button, then kind of go ahead and bug them and pester them and highlight things as needed. But if you want to bug them the second they try to type something wrong, you can put it in the onChange event built into RMQ, and then it'll immediately identify to them that they're doing something wrong. And additionally, we should be able to clear all the validations off if there's some reason we want to get rid of them, and you can take a particular validation and remove it. If you have, if this is selected, this field should be disabled and doesn't matter about the validation. I don't think I actually did a slide on that, but you can actually turn off all validations by putting yourself in RMQ debug mode, which helps you when you're building an application like the sample application with the shipping, where you want to make sure that you can actually get all the way through the process just hitting OK the whole time, especially if you've got like really long build time like we used to. And this is another aspect that sort of emerged from the community. User experience. Developers don't think about user experience. And there's a lot of times where we're very rough with our users, and we don't really understand what that does to our product. So part of what we have to do is that when they're wrong, we could be helpful to them. It's the person who obviously is lost in the subway that you can kind of walk up to. It really changes the experience for the user at that same time. So we can be friendly by default, which will actually give you some kind of validation error. So if you are trying to validate for an email, it will say, input requires a valid email. And this is inside the errors that you can either alert using preferably the red alert gem, or anything else that needs to go to the user. But I'll admit, this is the most dry possible validation error possible, so let's be even more friendly. Inside your style sheet, you can create a hash of validation errors for each validation you plan on chaining. And then you have something that fits the personality of your application. So if you have an app like Yo, it could say something informative like, yo, that app is doing well. Okay, so we can override our basic validation error message and give something that I feel like brings them in a little bit more. So this brings up a pretty complicated question. What if you can't really handle validation in a simple regular expression? What if you need just a little bit more of work into it and you want to build that all into a rule? Well, it seems like a crazy idea. I wouldn't highly recommend it, but screw it, let's do it. Let's add that in there too. Okay. So you can create your own custom validation rule, as we stated, while appending with regular expression, the easy way. Or you can create your own validation rule with the simple add validator method. So add validator takes a block, and then whatever that block returns, should it be true or false, will be if that validation is true or false, of course with the value and the options passed along, which allows you the abilities of allow blank and all those other shortcuts that will immediately sync right on through. So in this example, I want to make sure that it's going to start with whatever letter is passed into that validation. We immediately use it. We're going to use our first letter validation with the letter X, which will say false for test and true for xenophobia. And this immediately gives us that benefit. And then if you end up building these and you're using them, don't be selfish. It's easy enough to go ahead and give it back. You just go ahead, here's obviously Mark, who added international phone numbers. And it's something that I never needed, he needed, and then it comes right back, of course with tests, lest you receive animated gifs of death. And then additionally, I think that that's, damn it, sorry about that. What's the future of this validation? I'd say that it's pretty complete inside RMQ. And therefore, it's actually rolled, of course, into Red Potion. What the hell is that anyway? None of us know. And you can do it, obviously, instead of RMQ validation, you could just, the validation's a little bit shorter and easier. But with working with all this together, what do we need to do? And I'm happy to say that with a lot of work right before this, I have a pretty close to workable solution already built into Blue Potion. So, yeah. And then, so we can expect to have that, and I expect that everybody's got all kinds of validation rules that nobody ever thought of that we can see pull requests for in the future. And I probably didn't do the entire 30 minutes, but that's everything. Thanks, so. Nobody should have any questions, by the way, because that was perfect. It's a good question. It's a good question. I looked in the mirror. Everybody enjoying Paris? Oh, yes. A lot of it. There was a small, I might have sent you a bug issue. The regular expression object in Android RubyMotion is very closely tied using the object, which I had to use quite a bit. We can kind of go over that. Doesn't have a .new yet, but that's okay because I was able to just use the regular expression built into Android for all those instances, and that actually worked well. There was another thing where it was almost exactly usable again, but I think there's a class level variable that I needed to move over and then point the references through that. So the only thing I have left to do is the events, the validation events, like on invalid and on valid, which I don't know if anybody's going to use, but I'm going to port them over. But yeah, it was really, really close because that code base is pure Ruby, right? So for the most part, it's really a good sort of like cut through on exactly what's going on when you're moving it over. You got it. Any others? I know, it's perfect. Ah, yes. Oh, that's a good question. Well, what happens is whenever I need one, I go to my fan website. Just pull one off the forum. It's pretty much all I do, yeah. Yes, sir. So one of the things that I really, and just talking about sharing between Rails and the mobile, one of the things I was trying to do specifically in the validation is sort of merge with model validations in the names, like presence and validating not numericality, but number. And so in a lot of ways, it's sort of like JavaScript validation. It's more like jQuery validation if you think about it. You're doing it to give the user faster feedback, because if you send it off to the server, you're going to get some kind of feedback from the API telling you that it's immediately not useful in that perspective. So yeah, preferably as long as the API team is awake and actually doing their job. But one of the things that happens is lots of times things have to build up over time before you actually send off to the server. So it's really good to get the validation, especially if you're going through some kind of wizard through the steps. But we just clean it up front, and so that everything that goes to the server is fine. But of course, it's never a replacement for looking at what your server gave back to you. If you've got, if your JSON's telling you there's an error, even though you didn't validate it, that's a good sign that you need to. Yes, you, sir, with the guy with the shirt. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. One of my favorite ways is to actually do apply style on all the invalids. Yep. 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 Yeah, it's actually came out pretty beautiful. Yeah, as a matter of fact, if you say rmq.all.errors, like the validation errors, the only ones that will come back are the validation errors. So that'll be an array of 1. If there's only one thing that's wrong, validation error of 1. Yeah. Well, with that one, I think it's I think you would want to select the invalid, and then you can grab the error off of that one if you wanted to have them like bring focus back to that field. But that should be one method, so I expect a pull request with typos in it. No test. Mark will be on you in a second. All right, well, I mean, like I said, I don't think validation is the most exciting thing. I think the most exciting thing about this is that I reached out, and really just from a guy in New Orleans who really didn't know too many people, I was connecting with people all over the US, and I get to see your pretty faces today. And it's like, oh man, these are the people I've been working alongside independently the whole time. So ultimately, I guess like that's what I say, it's a double entendre. Ooh, the French. I didn't say it, the French is not over. That is French, right? Okay. No, it's a validating your existence and what you're doing as well. So the validation of it is just for your code, but at the same time, that was the beginning of quite a few pull requests and gems, and beginning to actually influence in this community. All right, thank you.